Sabhyada, could you come online and start the proceedings for the day, please?
So welcome friends. Yeah, welcome to the 7th of the 10th part webinar on millets. My friend DJ Guru, who is actually running this show for some time, and it's the excellent responses we are getting from all over the country, and the people who are part of the RRA network and those who are not part of the RRA network also. Very warm welcome to all of you. Today we have Dr. Sushanto, who actually did a lot of work on Odisha Millet Mission program in Odisha. He will be joining you with you to discuss about the millets production systems and all that. So I welcome you all. I should not take much time to this. And while DG Guru, I used to introduce him that the person who think about millets, eat millets, and sleep millets. So the person he is. So we had a very good friend, and then it's really excellent to see that this series of webinar has been excellent for the learning of all the people, generated a lot of interest on the millets. And today is very specific on the thing that Sushanto has been working for a long time. I know him personally. We are colleagues together, and he has done tremendous work on the seed production as well as the bringing the one of the largest program. Today, I would say that Odisha Millets Mission is the largest program in the country right now, covering 14 districts in Odisha and around 74 blocks in Odisha. And he's part of the program from the beginning, and he is one of the major pillar of the OMM program in Odisha. So I welcome you, Sushanto, for this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabhyada. Fanish, can you please get the presentation on? So, welcome everyone to the 7th edition of the No Millets webinars. Well, I shouldn't say edition, episode is better. We are going to be talking about millet cultivation today. And as Abhyada introduced, we have a, what shall I say, a wealth of practice in our midst today, who is also our anchor for the day, Susantada. So, Susantada, I'll just present my short presentation, and then we will take questions, which I would like you to moderate, please, as we had discussed earlier. So can everyone hear me clearly? I hope one of you can just confirm.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today we are going to be talking about millet cultivation. It's a vast topic within just the various, we have split up the whole millet value chain or ecosystem into 10 different episodes. And but even within cultivation, there are so many different aspects. So I'm going to be, as you might have already realized from the earlier sessions, I'm focused more on conveying the techniques and the methodology rather than in feeding the output. So this presentation also follows the same trend where I'll share the logic, I'll share the method, I'll share the technique rather than the individual, how do I grow proso millet, or why should I grow this or not grow this. So I'll give the broader picture rather than the microscopic details. So we will discuss some of the details as the questions come in. So feel free to ask whatever questions you have on your mind. The Q&A option on Zoom or the comment section on YouTube live stream are both being monitored. So our volunteers will be collating the questions and making it available for our anchor Susantada and myself to be able to see the questions. So let's get into the presentation itself. So let's go to the next slide, please. because my network is not very good, I have the presentation is being shared from a different connection. So you will have to bear with me as I say next slide, next slide. So each slide has a slide number. So please make sure that in case you need to reference it, feel free to use that. And the slides are also, like the recordings as well, are available on share alike and attribution only license. So you can use it for any purpose, whatever you seem fit, as long as you attribute where you got it from, and also share alike. So whatever you produce with this, we would request that you share it with a similar license. So these webinar series, as I mentioned, we have broken it into different topics, the millet ecosystem value chain. And we have covered 6 different aspects. And today is the 7th aspect, the millet cultivation. We have 3 more sessions coming up. I'll mention about that later in the overall. The idea is to look at millet ecosystem from a sustainable food systems perspective rather than purely as millet promotion. So even though we are talking millets most of the time, our focus is primarily on building a sustainable food system, an equitable food system. And so the series of webinars is to introduce how these things play out in different aspects of the millet ecosystem. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in this presentation, I'll be talking about the method. What would be the vision, objectives, aim, praxis? How are these things going to help in when we are planning cultivation? And I'll also touch upon some 4 or 5 different aspects of cultivation and why or how do we think and how do we strategize on these aspects. And then I would like to summarize. This is supposed to be a 20-minute presentation, and I hope I can stay within that time limit. So let's go to the next slide. So when we are trying to come up with any action plan, like most of us who have planned activities would know that we need to have a clear vision. What do we want to achieve? Now, with this webinar series, or as highlighted in this webinar series, many of us are approaching millets primarily from a sustainability perspective. And this sustainability perspective is triggered by the fact that there is a nutritional requirement, there is a health requirement, there is an equity requirement in our society today, where inequity and a lack of access to nutritious food among the producer community itself is so stark. So we recognize that food is a right, and that people should be able to you know uh, uh, get the nutrition from the produce that they themselves are cultivating, which unfortunately is not the case in most situations today. The producers have to sell their crops to the market, and they have to buy their whatever they consume, food grains, because in most cases they cannot get it processed in the local space. So there's the right question of equity also. So when it comes to planning cultivation also, let's be very clear and take a long-term perspective. If we do not have that long-term perspective, we cannot aim to move towards sustainability. So, but vision itself is not sufficient. We have to identify certain objectives. So what are objectives? Objectives are basically an actionizing of the vision. So something that we can achieve, something that is concrete, that we can identify. We can say, yes, this is done, check. So similarly, if we sometimes aims and objectives can be used in an overlapping fashion. I use it slightly differently. So once the objectives are identified, then we identify what is the aim. What do I aim to achieve at the end of this season, or in the next 1 year, or in the next 5 years? So it is in some sense working to realize the objectives and visions, and you can you basically plan your tasks in order to achieve an aim, meet a target. So that is the what I mean by aim. And of course, the tasks and praxis is basically how we go about achieving our objectives or our meeting our aims. What is extremely critical is that we need to innovate. We cannot go on with the same old ways of doing things. We need to come up with better ways of doing things, we need to identify why we are doing what we are doing, and which means that we need to review our actions, our objectives, our plans, strategies. So it is extremely critical that even as a farmer, we have this in mind that we have to innovate and we have to review our actions and plans. Let's go to the next slide. So with this background, I would like to apply this methodology in some sense to cultivation and look at different aspects of cultivation briefly, given the restrictions of time. We'll look at choice of crop. What crop will I grow this season, or crops? Um, what are the seeds that I would use? What are my cultivation practices going to be? How will I look at soil health, and what can I do about it? Inputs and interventions, and of course, yield and productivity. Let's go to the next one. So when we look at choice of crop, in our vision, we should be very clear that monocropping is detrimental to the ecology and to the farmer's family health as well, financial as well as physical health. So multi-crop fields with both flora and fauna. So not just in terms of plants, but also in terms of the ecosystem. Um, an agrobiodiverse agroecology is what we are trying to achieve, and that is our vision. So with that vision, we have to plan, and the planning has to happen according to the agroclimatic zone we are in, our soil, what are our available resources, primarily water and labor. So not just that, many other things as well, but primarily. So taking these various aspects into mind, we have to strategize what crops will I grow in this piece of land in this season. Because it's very easy to say that, hey, grow millets with groundnuts and pigeon pea. But if groundnuts have not been cultivated in that area, or pigeon pea is not a crop that is typically cultivated in that area, our saying that this is the standard combination does not help, because local practices, local preferences are something that are important when it comes to agricultural planning or planning of cultivation. So the choice of crop has to be moderated by the local realities, and more so by the fact of how much water do I have and how much labor can I invest in my farm. Let's go to the next one. So when we look at seeds, I think I don't need to say too much about the fact that you know buying seeds from the market is not a healthy practice, but at the same time, it is in many situations not there are no alternatives. But with the programs like Orissa Millet Mission and various other non-profits who are working to promote millets and multi-cropping and sustainable farming, we are able to access much better seeds. But we don't have to really depend on institutions. There are many farmers, even to this day, in many of these communities where there are still, you know, um, farmers growing millets who have saved their local seeds. It's going to be difficult to find these farmers because they do not advertise themselves. They are not available in the market the way other packed seeds are, but they are there. Now, just because we got a seed from a farmer doesn't mean that we can settle for that, because seed selection is a process. It is a multi-season process. So you have to try out those seeds, see what happens, and it's an ongoing exercise. We cannot think that once we get it, it's done. No. And also, we have to recognize that we have to keep working on our seeds. We cannot settle for something that we just got and say, hey, now I don't need to do anything. We have to naturalize them. Naturalize them primarily means that you have to identify which of these plants that you have that have grown from what you have sown have adapted to the local environment and are thriving. This is very important because not everything is going to succeed, and you need to improve your seed stock. So improvement of seed stock is not by adding some genes from some other species, or enhancing a particular gene, but rather looking at the phenotypical characteristics. What do you see in the farm? And identifying, okay, these plants, mark them for seeds. Don't harvest them for when you're harvesting your grains or your fodder or other things. Mark these plants because they are doing much better than the rest, and use those seeds in the next season. Make sure that you use those seeds as well in the next season, because you will be able to see that the crop, the plants are doing much better. So the idea of local seeds does not mean settling for however it grows. Local seeds means just that, seeds that come from the local area. It does not mean we don't apply our mind or our techniques of improving seeds, because these local seeds didn't come about by accident. Lot of generations have worked on these seeds in order to bring it to its current state. And we should not be idle, not ideal, but we shouldn't be just idle consumers. We have to be participants in this seed survival of our and of our ecosystem. So that happens when we participate in such processes. Let's go to the next slide. So is it just the seeds that matter? No. I mean, what really matters is how do we practice our farming. So again, these are strongly dependent on available resource and local conditions. But there again, or in this aspect again, it is extremely critical that we collate, we gather what are the traditional knowledge in the local space. Most old people would have participated in farming in some way or the other, in a village, in any rural space. So it that is one of the first places that we have to start, where we start talking to old people. Many places have had travelers and gazetteers and other people publishing things, or even research has been done in understanding food practices, understanding cropping. So it would be good to review those things, but mainly it's on farm practices from farmers is the best way to go about it. But it's not enough to just collate and say, oh, they would till it with this kind of a plow. Well, yes, but try to understand why that plow was used, in what kind of conditions. So we have to understand, analyze, and innovate. And not just innovate, we should also look at contemporarizing it. So not just use it in the exact same way that my grandfather or great grandfather used to do it, but rather understand the logic of it and see how we can do it today with as little impact as possible and as much output as possible. So again, when I say traditional practices, it doesn't mean go back to what we did 100 or 200 years ago. It just means that we understand the logic of it and try to apply that, try to realize that, and achieve the aims and objectives with which that generation was doing the practices that they were. Let's go to the next slide. So all these matter, or all these can bear fruit primarily when the soil is healthy. If the soil is not healthy, if there isn't enough biomass in the soil, if there isn't enough water retention in the soil, all these efforts will not bear fruit. And therefore a lot of sustainable farming advocates are focusing more and more on looking at soil health. And how do we understand soil health? We can send samples to a lab and get the analysis, but what I would strongly prescribe is taking the long term way. And the long term approach is to develop a sense of touch. How does it feel? Does it feel cold? Does it feel hot in the afternoon? Does it feel the same cold or heat next day morning? Does it smell the same? Does it look the same? If I go 1 feet under, how is the soil? If I just 6 inches below soil level, how is it? So identifying the health of my soil, relating to my soil is extremely important for anybody, not just a farmer, and especially so for a farmer. So once we start identifying these things, we need to identify milestones. We need to have a plan on how I'm going to improve my soil quality, soil condition, and identify tasks and inputs, plan my crops, which would enhance my soil nutrition, and also look at this again in a long term action plan, not just in terms of one season. This whole DAP urea business that came about primarily because they did not look at what happens to the soil. The focus was primarily on developing the yield and not on the soil health. And therefore, we have pretty much killed most of the soil that is being used in farmlands today. Most soil in farmlands today are dead soil. We need to revive it, we need to rejuvenate it, and we have to come up with long term action plans of how we are going to do that. And that doesn't mean, let's go to the next slide, that doesn't mean that we will not get something out of it. We have to live, we have to survive. So we will plan our crops, we will plan cultivations while keeping these aspects in mind. So in order to get something out, we have to put some things in. And the primary thing that we will be investing in cultivation is our effort, our love, our sweat. But that is not enough. We have to bring in inputs from outside. Not all soils can support, or ecosystems can support, zero dependence on external inputs. So some amount of inputs might be needed. And here is where informed decisions are very critical. The inputs might be restorative or curative. Something might be happening and I want to cure that. So that's why I'm using it. Or it might be restorative. Something has happened already and I want to bring it back to a state where it is healthy again. But what we need to remember is that most of our interventions should be systemic. It shouldn't just be trying to fix one particular thing. Because you try to fix one particular thing, something else is bound to go wrong. So we have to take a holistic systemic perspective where we are looking at a long term gradual change, and sometimes we have to intervene in a non systematic, but rather in a symptomatic fashion. Just like we have fever and the fever doesn't go down for 3 days, then I do take medicine, but I let it run for a day or two at least before I go to the doctor. I mean, don't do it to yourself because I said so, but broadly speaking, what I mean is that certain things we should be able to address ourselves using remedies that we know, that we learn. But and we also should weigh the cost and benefit analysis. We have to do a cost benefit analysis. I mean, it sounds like business jargon, but every farmer does that every day, every season. It is just that they are under such stress and duress that they cannot think beyond the immediate requirements. And we, as reasonably resourceful people, and as organizations trying to engage with farmers in promoting these cultivation practices, okay, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened, but I realized that I was off for a couple of minutes or a minute or so. And okay, we do have everyone back. So I'll continue where I was. So we have to be principled but moderated by reality. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So while we when I'm talking about moderated by reality, the reality of existence and living is what I meant. And which means that we have to set yield and productivity targets. Yield is not a bad word. Yield has been made into a bad word because yield has been primarily looked at from a human consumption perspective, not in terms of fodder, not in terms of what happens to the soil or the other fauna or even flora, but just in terms of human consumption. And as people working towards sustainable farming, we have to set our yield and productivity targets on these various criteria. So whether we achieve it or not achieve it, how we could achieve it and how not to do things is these are all various things that we need to get into, and I won't get into just in terms of time. I won't get into it now, but we really need to think about this, and that's why method of reviewing and revising our strategy every season is extremely important. And larger yields are not necessarily better. Uh, in fact, in most cases, if you're just looking at yield in terms of one aspect, it's not a healthy scenario. So, but at the same time, there is a reality that I need this much to feed my family. So a minimum of this much needs to be secured. Maybe it's not possible if my soil is not healthy. And that is where the role of organizations and the state comes in, state as in the, the government comes in, where we support farmers, because the long term interests are not just of the farmer but of the entire society. And this is where we as people working for improvement of ecology, society, individuals, farming community, we really need to focus on identifying what is our strategy, what are the gaps that we are going to fill, so that the farmer is not stressed and has to focus only on the human consumption yield. Let's go to the last slide, please, or the last but one, the summary slide. So overall, when we are planning cultivation, the focus has to be on the process and the people. It cannot just be a matter of a philosophy, an ism, or even a product. Just because I replace my, let's say, paddy field with millet cultivation, I'm not going to be moving towards sustainability. Changing one crop and just replacing it with another crop is still better. I'm not saying it's not good, but that is not enough. We have to go beyond that. And that's why I'm saying that process and people are important. And it has to serve, while we look at long term vision and things like that, we have to meet our short term requirements. If it does not serve our short term requirements, we need to re strategize. And we cannot compromise. While we re strategize, let us not compromise on our long term objectives or our vision. Because if we are looking at farming isolated from food or from health or from overall economy, it is going to play into the current paradigm of isolating individuals and letting only the markets govern and connect different entities. And we are realizing in many different aspects, whether it is through the COVID pandemic or the economic crisis that is in front of us, many ways we are realizing that marketplace is needed. We need to participate in the market, but we cannot let the market decide for us, whether it is in our farms, whether it is in our kitchens or in our medicine cabinets. So I would like to stop here. Last slide, please. The resources for this are all shared on the millet.org. There's a lot of information on millets.wordpress as well. And of course, a lot of various resources, not just on millets, but various other aspects of rain-fed farming on rainfedindia.org. The website for the webinar series, where you can find the recording and the slides for this session and the previous sessions. And that's the millet.org/KMW 2020. Do share your questions and answer and any doubts or comments that you would like to share with us on the Q&A section on Zoom, or on the comment section of the YouTube live stream. Thank you for the patient hearing. I hope I haven't shot over time. And Susanta, over to you to take us through the Q&A and discussions. And we will try to wrap up by 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Diji. So, any questions regarding this presentation? It's a nice presentation. It's basically on how a agroecological system runs in a very hilly terrains, and small and marginal farmer concentrating residing there, and how their livelihood depends on basically on different type of millets cultivations and their soil type and everything in their rituals. So I may request you any questions regarding this.
Yeah. Susanta, you are able to see the spreadsheet?
Just a minute.
Yeah.
I have seen what is the crops combination in rain-fed red soils. Okay. So it is asked by Patangi Rambabu.
So the combinations in red soils. So red soils are extremely well suited for millet cultivation. Not just millets, but for many oil seeds and pulses as well. So typically, if you see, mixed crop is where you have different components, different food groups, different nature of plants, right? So you will have oil seeds, you will have pulses, you will have millets, of course, and you will also have fibrous crops. You very likely would also want to include some flowering plants, because flowering plants attract a lot of pollinators, not just pollinators, but birds and various other species as well, which nurtures an ecosystem. And many a time, the some of the flowering crops or flowering plants or herbs that we grow, they act as pest repellents also. So, for example, with millets, when we grow foxtail millet in typical red soils, we grow foxtail millet, groundnuts, and pigeon pea. I mean, that's the 101 of mixed cropping, let's say. These three crops are a very good combination in even the least productive of soils. All three are rain-fed crops. They don't need too much inputs, and they are fairly well. And depending on your local cultivation practices, you would be able to identify when you should sow what and how. I think one of the slides in this presentation was of the classic groundnut, foxtail millet, and pigeon pea. I think it was the first one, I believe. Fanish, can you please scroll back? No. Yeah, this one. So this is a field near Kadri in Anantapur district of Andhra Pradesh. In the lines are actually foxtail millet and pigeon pea, and in between the lines is the groundnut crop. And so that's a classic combination. But it's not that is where we stop. There are various other combinations that one could use based on your requirements, based on the soil's requirements, and based on nurturing the local ecosystem. Susanta, would you like to add something to that?
No, these red soils generally they are rich in iron. In case of Odisha, I am saying that, but it is best for paddy crops like finger millet and then sorghum, foxtail millet. And in combination with this, you can grow pulses like climber, that black gram. It's not the bush blackgram that we are usually for cultivating for yield. But
Yeah.
the practice, as Gigi said, exactly in Odisha, the tribals are practicing all the hardy crops along with pulses in the red soil and followed by the Niger, which is a
Yeah.
so it is a combination pattern they have followed, and
Yeah.
you can see any loss in the crops in that seasons. They even if one crop loss, they get more than 3-4 crops. So and it is the soil having very less water. I mean, it's a, water will be there, but the water holding capacity will be low in that red soil.
Correct.
So second question,
Mhm.
what do you mean by available resources? So
Ah.
he
Yeah. So
so
yeah, please.
yeah. So in that condition context, I mean to say the available resources already Digi said. First, the available resources, the experience and labor, and the identification of soil knowledge of that people. That is the one. Knowledge is the one resource. And second resource, available resources. What are the resources available nearby? How they can utilize these resources to their soil for better crop production. So knowledge and resources like suppose they have the farmed manure, they have the green manure, they have anything they can utilize for this soil. So if you see the practice of tribals, they whatever the leaves fallen below the tree, they can collect and put on the soil.
Yeah.
So it's one of the resource. So it's a kind of sustainability practice for these resources for the tribals.
Correct. So in the general context, when I say available resources, I want to contextualize it with the agrarian crisis.
Mhm.
See, the intensive farming that is practiced and promoted by various institutions here in India and abroad, they are essentially looking at maximizing yield and not bothered about minimizing inputs or looking at what resources are already available. They want to achieve a yield, and in order to achieve that yield, and that to a short term benefit, they're ready to put in as much as needed to achieve that target. And I feel that is a extremely wrong way of looking at it, and that is one of the reasons why we are in this crisis that we are today. The agrarian distress is primarily because it is not grounded in reality. What is available? How much money do I have? How many people can I employ in my farm? How many people, as in how many people do I have in my household who can work on the farm, or who can come for harvest time at least? So these are things that I need to plan, and in order to plan that, I need to know what I have and what I don't have. So if I say that last season whatever I grew, maybe 30% of that money I will invest in my next season, I know I have to manage within 10,000 rupees, let's say,
So
right?
next, hello.
So I don't want my inputs to go beyond 10,000. The natural is also something that we have to take into account. And that's what I meant by looking at reality rather than just going by what we want to achieve. So a process and people centric planning rather than a product centric planning or a philosophy centric planning.
So next question is, uh, what do you mean by financials in cost benefit analysis?
Yeah. So it follows from the just what we just discussed. When we are trying to intervene, I think it was in the context of interventions that we talked about this. Fanish, can you just go to that slide on intervention? So we need to identify how much is it going to cost us, and that cost and benefit that we identify cannot just be on the financial matter, as in, okay, if I put in 5,000 rupees of inputs, will I recover that 5,000 rupees or not, is the way conventional farming advisories are designed. In fact, if any of you is familiar, you would have heard of ETL, economic threshold level. So which means that if the crop damage is more than ETL, then intervention is not economically viable. They call it economics, but it is literally, it is financial, it is not economic. So but when we are doing this kind of cost benefit analysis, what I am asking is that we don't just look at it from a purely money perspective, but also look at it from an ecological perspective and other perspectives also. So I might be able to invest 5,000 rupees and encash about 20,000 rupees from an intervention. But is it ecologically sound? What is the ecological cost that I would pay? The increased use of urea and DAP, a purely financial analysis was done. And because farmers cannot afford the true cost of it, the government over the years, over the many, many years now, has been subsidizing the cost of chemicals that are poured into our soils, killing them. The ecological cost was not at all taken into picture. So when I'm talking about cost benefit analysis and financials, I'm talking at it as the conventional analysis that is done. Let's not limit ourselves to that. We have to look beyond that, including the ecological perspective.
Yes, yes. So next is this is a question regarding choice of seeds. Will the continuous cycle of seed saving and growing alter the seed quality and DNA due to mutation? So in that case, may I answer?
Please, please.
Yeah. What already one of the slide DG focus on that we are looking for the phenotypical characters of the gene. We have not looking after the any genetic variation, genetic characterization of the gene. So whatever the available seeds by the farmer, we just select the good quality of either panicle, good quality of earhead, and these are the good quality which they have been selecting a long period already. DG focus on that. So here the seed is the farmer said seed which we have to look after the process of selection, collection, and preservation of these seeds. Then these are the all traditional seeds, and basically traditional seed having all type of genetic character when it will be preserved, conserved, and cultivated in their original ecological condition. So in that question, generally what done, farmers use their farms have seed and they use one land for 3 years. Then they change the seed. Either they change the crop variety and grow in that land, or they can shift this seed variety to other land. And because something environmental condition happen to mutant, some mutation happened on the environmental changes, and some DNA may be corrupt.
Yeah. So Santada, probably we have lost your connection. So I'll just add to what Santada already mentioned. Okay, he's back, but we'll wait for his audio.
Document the farmer's knowledge on gene.
Correct. So very, very well put, Santada. When we are looking at seed selections and seed improvements, what we see in the farm, in our grains, is what we are selecting for, and not based on the genes inside. The genes are there, they are true and very much available as a resource. But when we say genetic resource and diversity of genetic resource, it doesn't mean that we have to get only from genes that we are able to identify. We have to recognize that farming is an activity engaged by millions of people, not just a few scientists, but millions of people, if not billions of people. So we want people to connect back with farming, connect back and reskill populations to identify what is quality and what is not. So the idea of seed selection and seed preservation is exactly antithetical, or it challenges the market system that has been established. The market benefits if people are buying seeds without knowing what needs to be done to save seeds. And we are emphasizing that, we as in a lot of individuals and organizations, we are emphasizing on the fact that seed sovereignty, every farmer should be independent, not be dependent on one entity, whether it is government owned or private. It should be a community resource. Seeds should be a community resource. Genetic biodiversity has to be a community resource. So that is the motivation of looking at phenotypes. And like so Susantada was very well describing on-farm activities that would help us in selecting better seeds rather than just looking at it from a genetic perspective.
Then uh, another question is, what is the spacing? I think we didn't. I think we didn't talk about any spacing in this thing, because
Yeah.
we are.
So, Susadada, you want to comment on this first, or shall I?
No, you can go ahead.
So, couple of things. One is that spacing between, what is the question that we always need to ask? Spacing between the same, plants of the same crop, or spacing between this crop and a different crop. Because ideally, we are not going to plant only one crop in a field. Ideally, we will have more than one crop. So as you saw in the groundnut, pigeon pea and foxtail millet slide and the photograph, you will see that there is a spacing between the lines of pigeon pea and foxtail, which are both in one line, and then there's groundnut in between. So locally, there are established, identified spacings for different reasons. I might be in a wind shadow, and I might actually go for less spacing. But if I am not in a wind shadow and I expect strong winds in my farm, then I might go for a line of barrier crops, like jowar or any of jute, or any of these tall growing plants, crop, which will also block the wind. And even after that, I might actually go for slightly tighter packing. So what I grow, where I am growing, even when I am growing, because if it's the season when there is not much wind, I don't need to go for such tight packing. I can space it up, because the more we space, the more soil is available, the more nutrition is available for a particular plant to flourish. And the more, especially when it is young, when we sow, if we are able to maintain a certain spacing and not depend on thinning, our yields and our crop health is going to be much higher, much better than if we were to just throw seeds everywhere, and then after they have grown to 20 days, then I'll do a thinning. That's okay, it's still better than nothing. But then it's like, initially, all those plants that saplings, not even plants, those saplings were sharing whatever resource was there. And the growth trajectory is set in that early stage. So we need to be very careful about spacing. I don't have a fixed answer for that, sorry. We need to identify it in the local context, and more than just the local context, it should be in the context of what crops that you are planning to grow. Yeah, Susandada, would you like to add to that?
Exactly what you said, that it depends upon the crop you want to plant, also depend upon the soil type. If it's a stony soil, then you have to go rich and fallow. Not
We are again losing you, Susantada.
And voice is not clear actually.
Yeah, सुशांत दादा आपका वीडियो म्यूट है ना? हाँ, वीडियो तो म्यूट है. No, actually he's disconnected. Okay, so let me open the questions so that I can. Okay. Why? Okay, he's reconnecting. Hopefully he'll be back. What is the authentic source to buy the seeds? Is there any government agency selling seeds and any subsidy for the seeds? Susanta is still reconnecting. I don't see his audio connected yet. So I'll go ahead with this question of where do we get authentic seeds? The best place to get authentic seeds is from authentic people. It could be organizations, it could be individuals. Ideally, it is someone close to where you are planning to cultivate, whether it is an institution or a individual. And even more than institutions, individuals are what we would encourage you to look at and talk to get the seeds, because there is a relationship that we build, and seeds are the repositories of not just genetic diversity, but also of people and relationship in society. So there's a lot of history to this. There's a lot of deconstruction that has happened in the recent past by dependency on market, and a lot of organizations are trying to rebuild. Whenever we talk of buying seeds, you might have come across this in many places. We strongly encourage people taking the seeds and giving back at least 2 times, if not more, of the seeds that you have taken back to the person you got it from, rather than paying them money. Even if you're paying them money, please go back and give back in terms of whatever you have grown and whatever you want to give to this individual who blessed you with their wealth. So we would encourage you to look at this in terms of not just a financial transaction. Now, authenticity of the seeds is a very important thing, but in some sense, we have to recognize that this whole authenticity question is also it's pinned on this aspect of what is it that you're promised when you are getting a seed, and that promise has to be more than just a matter of yield. If that promise is an ecological promise, then yes, that authenticity is very important. But if that promise is just of getting this many tons of output from grain output from your farm, and that's a fairly short-sighted approach to take towards seed selection. I would strongly encourage looking at a broader spectrum. I apologize for the background noise. My neighbor's house, they just started doing some repair work. Oh my God. Okay. Let me take this off of speakerphone. Yeah, I'm going to hold it to my hand, and yeah. So I was saying that I should just mute my video. Just give me 1 second. Yeah, I just muted my video. So I was just mentioning that when we are looking at seed selection or buying seeds, we should be looking at beyond just the government seal or the brand that is selling, but also look at the larger perspective. Susantada, are you back? No, I don't see him having connected back. We still have a few more minutes. Okay, there is one. What is the role of terpenes in millet cultivation? I really don't know, Patangi Garu, what is terpenes that you're referring to. Is it an acronym? What is terpenes? I have not come across this. I'm sorry. I don't know what is the terpenes that you're referring to. There is another request to elucidate what Susanta said. Padmini madam, I'm not sure which aspect of what Susanta said you're referring to again. I apologize for that. we are going to share detailed Q&A on our website after this session, on the millet.org/KMW 2020. You'll be able to find the Q&A from previous sessions. Soon after the session, we release the first cut, and after that, the moderator of the session and I together put in some comments and detailed replies. So we will be sharing that, and hopefully in that we will be able to respond to both Padmini Madam and Patangi Garu's comments on request for information. Patangi Rambab Garu, if you can please type what you mean by terpenes, that would help us in identifying what what information you're looking for. Unfortunately, Susanta Da has not been able to rejoin yet. He lives in Odisha, and yesterday, because of the day before yesterday, because of the Tufan, they had very bad connections. And yesterday we were able to have a conversation, and he felt that today he will be able to participate through the session. Looks like he has had some connectivity issues, and we have unfortunately not been able to get his closing remarks on the session. Sabyada, if you are around and if you have a few minutes, would you like to present your the closing remarks for the session?
Okay, so thank you, Deji, and I see that there is a lot of questions that came from the participants. There are few other questions, and when I was talking, there are few other questions as came in. So finally, I see that whatever you do, so ultimately in the millets and whatever the webinar series that we have been saying, it's talking about mostly on the very principles to the natural as well as the ecological balance. Whether you grow crops and millets, and we are talking about it should not be monocrops. So principally we are talking that it's a combination of crops. Then if you look at the combination of what type of seeds are required, then again the authenticity of seeds someone has asked, and I like your answer that you can find a authentic seed from an authentic person, whether it is an authentic person or an authentic organization or something. So this is, and then I saw that there are some questions related to spacing and all that, and I see that ultimately we need to relate these things from the agroecological perspective, the ecology, and that what is there in the nature. I liked your point that you have said that yeah, we need to test our soil, but if we need to feel our soil also, right? So whether our soil is healthy soil or not, that I can feel it. I can feel it by touching. I can feel it by smelling the soil, right? It is not only about its chemical properties. So what you have said that if we are looking at the soil health, you look at try to understand that what is the current situation of the soil. Yeah. So I think this will be very useful session for all the participants that they have came in. If you're putting some other questions, I think there are two more questions. There, everything will be there. Please refer to again the Millet Foundation website, and question and answers will be there. And we look forward, Diji, to continue with your session. Two more sessions to go, three more sessions, 8, 9, 10, 10th. And I hope that this will be very useful for many of us. I can see that some of the participants who are also part of RRA Millets Working Group, Ravinder Reddy Saab and others, they are there. And there are several organizations now in India is actually talking about millets and promoting millets in their places. I hope these very specific, each and every subjects, each and every session will be very useful for them. And thank you very much, Diji, and thank you all the participants, and all the best for the next session. This is from me, Diji. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabyada. Just a plug for the remaining sessions. We have 3 more sessions, like Sabyada pointed out. The next one is going to be on Monday, the 25th. We are going to be talking about an introduction to mechanized processing, because as we were discussing, processing so that people can access the grains is very important. The nutrition in the grains is very important. After that, we'll be talking about on 28th Thursday, we'll be talking about quality assessment of different stages of the product, whether it is grains, whether it is rice, rava, flour.
We lost you, Diji.
Digi? Digi? You there?
I think there might be some issues.
Issues.
Yeah, he's back. Yeah.
For all those who are still around, sorry, I just lost my connection and reconnected. So it's not just the people in Odisha who are having connectivity issues. So I was just mentioning about the other sessions. So there are 3 more sessions. Feel free to join. Check out KMW 2020 on the millet.org for more details of the earlier sessions as well as the forthcoming ones. And thank you very much. Thank you, Sabyada. And thank you, Susanta. That was a lot of information you have shared, and we look forward to more conversations. And folks, we will be sharing Susanta Das contacts as well on the Q&A report. So please look out for that. And yeah, thank you everyone. Have a good day. Just a quick note, there's another webinar planned today at 4:30. Please go to the RRA Network's YouTube channel and join us in listening to and having a conversation with Devinder Sharma ji on the agrarian crisis and various aspects of COVID and post-COVID reality and how we can climb out of this. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.